Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great and that you're following the 3 H's of the channel. In this video, I have 4 encounters for you that are all pretty crazy and terrifying in their own right. There's one from the Florida Panhandle, one from Ohio, one from Louisiana, and one from Ontario, Canada. So, if that sounds like something you're interested in, pull up a stump and let's get into it. Thank you for watching. So this was something that happened way back in June of 2013. That Friday, I had decided to go to the trailer with my girlfriend and her friend for the weekend. The trailer is in Ontario in a place called Highland Pines. Behind the trailer, there's a small hill leading toward a grassy opening with a creek that's running around it. It had rained the day before, so the hill was muddy, and the creek was slightly higher than usual. Around 1:30 a.m., we decided to go out to the grassy area. We were about to get started when we hear some voices in the distance. There's no houses on the other side of this creek because the forest is completely protected. We're confused, but the voices are getting louder and we can't make out the words, but there's multiple voices. We stop everything, we get our lawn chairs and start just walking away. We get a bad feeling about the whole situation. The voices are louder and clear, but I still can't understand what they're saying. We start to run. A sense of panic overwhelms us. Then we hear a new sound, water splashing. Like I said, it rained the night before, but they shouldn't have been able to run through it. We get up the muddy hill. We look back, and we see dark figures, about 5 figures, coming towards the hill. We get inside the trailer. Full lockdown situation. We don't hear any more voices. We wait for a few minutes. Then we peek out the window and we see the 5 figures. They seem to be wearing masks. By masks, I just mean that they had something on their heads because it was all black. There was no eyes, no features of any kind. Not only that, we noticed that they just seemed to sort of float by walking along the back of the trailers. The next morning, we asked the neighbors if they've been hearing anything or seeing anything strange. They haven't. But another weird thing that we found, there were no footprints. I went back at least 5 more times, and nothing strange has ever happened. The morning after, they didn't believe me about there not being any footprints, so we all went out, and there was nothing. But not only was there nothing, our footprints were missing as well. So bizarre. I don't know what they were, but I'm glad that we weren't outside to find out. I grew up in a very rural part of Ohio. My house had a fairly dense set of woods located directly behind it. As a child, I had a passion for exploring. I especially loved exploring those woods. It was my favorite place to be, above all else. Prior to this incident, I call it, I had wandered through those woods many times, always with my mother's permission. There was one tree in particular that I frequently enjoyed climbing, usually about to the halfway mark, so I could perch myself on one of the heavier branches and just relax as I listened to the peaceful sounds of nature. Looking back, climbing that tree for the very first time was quite an accomplishment. From that position, I could partially see the back of my house. On that day, after a fair amount of exploring, I carefully scaled my favorite tree. I seated myself on a sturdy branch and took in the view. Now naturally, being late in October, the sun inevitably began to set within a few minutes. I always felt a little saddened to see the darkness approaching. The woods were like my own little sanctuary. I could entertain myself out there for hours. When the darkness began to fall, however, my mother would stand at the edge of the woods and call my name until I obediently returned home so as not to be stranded out there after dark. After watching the sun set until I could no longer see it, I began my descent down the tree. I was nearly at the bottom when I heard my mother's familiar voice calling my name. I thought nothing of it at first, as this routine had occurred plenty of times before. Then I realized something strange. As my feet touched the ground, my mother's voice was coming from behind me, deeper in the woods, rather than toward the entrance where she always stood when she called me home. My mom had never entered those woods before, at least not with me. I was eager to find her and show her all of my favorite spots before it grew too dark. That's when I realized that something was very off. How could she have gone into the woods ahead of me? Certainly I could have missed her, but as I said, she never entered these woods. She continued calling my name, but there was something strange about it. She sounded absolutely frantic, almost angry. Fearing that I was in trouble for reasons currently unknown, I froze in place. As her voice drew closer, I squinted my eyes to see if I could locate her and determine exactly how angry or upset that she appeared to be. However, I didn't see anyone. I didn't even see anything unusual. Suddenly, I heard her voice calling my name from the direction of my house, sounding much calmer, much more like her. And then seconds later, I heard it again from somewhere within the woods. It wasn't just an echo. I wasn't imagining things. I was literally hearing her beckoning me from the edge of our backyard, as well as ahead of me. My legs suddenly turned to jelly. I couldn't quite comprehend what was going on. "Come here, right now," the voice that I originally believed to be her screamed from just ahead. I realized that whoever or whatever was mimicking my mother was drawing closer. I didn't question which voice was actually my mother's, as there was something about the way it sounded that unnerved me. Terrified of what I would see if I stood there much longer, I turned around and ran toward the exit of the woods as quickly as my legs could possibly carry me. It was amazing that I didn't trip over anything in my haste. Even though my house wasn't very far away from where I had been standing, those woods had never seemed larger to me than they did in that moment. From behind me, my mother's voice continued to call my name, now sounding desperate. Panic set in as my actual mother finally came into view, waiting patiently as she usually did until I returned home. In my frightened state, I absolutely refused to look behind me. As soon as I was out of the woods and in the backyard next to my mother, the other voice was suddenly absent, suddenly gone. Rather than fading away, it seemed to stop the very moment that I stepped foot into my backyard. I must have looked as frightened as I felt because my mother asked me what was wrong. Slowly but surely, my panic subsided. I didn't say anything until we were safely inside the house with our doors locked. I asked my mother if she had entered the woods, appearing confused by the question. She told me that of course she hadn't. With that confirmation, I hesitantly asked her if she heard anyone else calling my name and yelling. The answer to that question was also no. Although I was still very much shaken up, I managed to explain everything that happened as clearly and rationally as possible. My mother was surprisingly nonchalant about the whole situation, explaining it away as that I must have imagined it, that I was spending too much time out there by myself, that I was hearing things. That incident in those woods has stayed with me to this day. I can still hear that voice as clear as a bell. Whoever or whatever was calling my name sounded exactly like my mother, but I know that it wasn't really her. Not only was she waiting for me outside, but the voice also sounded strange, in a way that I still can't fully explain. I didn't go back into the woods until I was 17 years old, and even then, I never hung out for very long. I've carefully gone over every possible explanation, but none of them seem entirely plausible. It certainly wasn't my mother playing a prank. There was no way she could pull it off. Not to mention the fact that she's never been one to play pranks anyways. I also highly doubt that it was anyone else, because as I stated before, we lived in a rural area. The closest neighbor was at least a mile away, and I wasn't personally acquainted with any of them. How could they have known my name? And, not only that, but where to find me? So I've got a story to share. I live in Louisiana, and I'm friends with an English professor who teaches at Southeastern Louisiana University. I took his class, and we ended up becoming good friends. We're going to call him Graham. Graham is a native. He grew up here, and he had a cottage on the James Joyce Reserve, west of Lake Pontchartrain. In this place, Graham made friends with a guy who's good friends with a guy named Shelby Stragna, whom Graham has also met. Shelby had a very short-lived TV show called Shelby the Swamp Man. He's a logger, and his job is to go into swamps and find specific trees that have sunk to the bottom. He jumps in, he coils it with chains, and brings it to the surface. These trees tend to sell for a lot of money, since they're extremely waterproof and sturdy. It's a dangerous profession, and sometimes makes good money, but you run the risk of finding no trees, and then making no money. Most of the time, these loggers either work by themselves, or just have one partner. Shelby usually works by himself, since it's less money that he has to share. This provides the context for the experience that Shelby had. Back in the early 2000s, before Hurricane Katrina, Shelby was deep in some swamp southwest of New Orleans. It was deep in the bayous, and he was searching for any signs of logs that had fallen into the swamp. As he was lifting a submerged log that he had found, he had this strange feeling that he was being watched. Suddenly, he noticed this strange-looking, one-eyed monkey perched on a branch in this nearby tree. It was just watching him. It wasn't moving or making any noise. Shelby was a little freaked out by it and decided to leave the area since he had found his log for the day. He dropped off his catch and returned to his camp, which was a few miles away from his spot. A week later, he was heading into the swamp one morning when he noticed the monkey was watching him from a different place. He only saw it for a few seconds since he was heading into a new area, but he didn't ever see it again. A few days later, though, Shelby was driving his boat down into the bayou, about a half a mile from his camp, and he noticed that the monkey had come back, that was watching him from the bank of a river. Again, he only saw it for a few seconds, but it freaked him out since he didn't really know what to think of it. He initially thought that it was some deformed monkey that had escaped a zoo or something. A few days later, Shelby's at his camp. He's sleeping by himself when he suddenly woke up and felt that extremely paranoid feeling again. He turned on his lights and saw that same monkey in his room, sitting on his dresser, just staring at him. He ran out, jumped in his truck, and drove straight to the city. A month passed, and he refused to go back to his camp because he was so scared of the thing. One day, one of his friends, the friend that Graham is friends with, convinced Shelby to go out to some lunch in the French Quarter. While they were walking around after lunch, they passed by a tarot shop. Shelby's friend was interested in getting a reading since he was about to buy a large chunk of land for some hunting reasons and wanted to know if he was going to make a good investment. Shelby was reluctant and said that he would just kind of sit back and watch. When they entered, the woman who owned the shop agreed to read Shelby's friend, and they sat down. I don't remember the cards she pulled or anything, but the short gist is that she foresaw a large transaction of money taking place for land, but that in the end, it would all be worth it. There were other details, but the important part is that she kept eyeing up Shelby. When she finished, Shelby was about to walk out when she stopped him. She told him to be careful. Her exact words were, "That thing isn't a monkey. That's just how it wants you to see it." He freaked out and actually paid her some money for this. That week, he asked some friends to go to his camp to get his stuff. He paid them for their work, but never went back to that camp himself. In fact, he never returned to the area. He ended up selling it. Years later, it was destroyed by Katrina. He never saw the monkey again, but he still does his logging. So I'm from a real small town in Florida called Weewahitchka. It's in Gulf County, about 50 miles southwest of Tallahassee on the Panhandle. The area has lots of lakes and rivers. We lived on several acres in the middle of nowhere. We had dirt roads my whole childhood. At the time, we had a single-wide trailer. Lots of people in our community were complaining about an upright creature that was terrorizing them at night and stealing livestock, stealing pets. My parents were city folks that moved into the area before I was born and opened a business, so my parents told me that it was stories just to scare us because we were outsiders. At the time when this happened, I was about 14 years old, and I had a younger brother that was 5 years old. And one night in October of 2004, my dad and I were watching TV. My brother was in bed. My mom was in the kitchen. At that time, me and my brother shared a bedroom, and I had to pass the kitchen and my bedroom to get to the bathroom. My brother was sitting up in bed, and he was crying. I tried to console him because I didn't want him to get in trouble for not sleeping. He whispered to me that a man was looking in his window. I looked out the window, and to my horror, I saw a pair of yellow glowing eyes watching us. So I grabbed my brother up. I knew my dad was in the living room and that he kept a gun on the kitchen counter. I yelled to my dad that some sicko was looking in the window at my brother. Just then, I saw his whole face. It looked like a Neanderthal man with long brown hair, and it looked terrifying. His face was at the bottom of the window. I saw his massive chest and abdomen. He must have been 9 feet tall. My dad burst out on the front porch with a gun in his hand, and he fired several times. It looked at my dad for maybe half a moment, and then ran for the tree line. My dad came in, and my mother and brother were crying because of the sound of the .44 Magnum. My parents told me to take my brother and go to bed. I overheard my parents talking. They didn't call the cops because they didn't know exactly what it was. I heard my dad say, "It's not human." My mother then said that tomorrow she wants all of the trees gone. Not a single one taller than my dad can stay. He reluctantly agreed. He called in every friend and every favor and had 7 acres removed by sundown on Saturday. And I had 2 friends that were close in age. One lived a mile away and the other 2 miles away. The closest came down that Saturday morning, and I asked him if he heard the gunshots the night before. I told him it was my dad. My mother came out and told me to stay out of the woods. She was going into town with my brother to buy curtains and blinds, which was something that we really didn't need before, but since this happened, we put curtains up. After my mother pulled away, we got our friends, and I guess they basically pulled together their friends so they could go look. So we grabbed our guns and our machete, and we knew the woods really well. We backtracked my yard and picked up on a trail. We spotted blood at the tree line. My father was washing away blood from the side of the mobile home, and so we went back into the woods, following the blood. As we walked, we came across a crude shelter with the remains of what looked like trash. This thing was stealing trash and taking it to this little crude shelter. We followed the trails for hours, and then we heard a howl and a scream like no other that we'd heard before. My father must have heard it and grabbed his buddies, and they raced to the woods with their guns in hand. They looked completely terrified when we finally crossed paths. He said they saw the blood trail and asked what we found. We told them about the shelter, and we took them to where it had been. We had been so keen on following the trail that we never noticed the carcasses of deer and other animals high up in the trees. My father chopped down the shelter and urinated all over it. One of his friends said that they had to mark to take back our land. It sounded crazy, but I looked up to this man, and he seemed to know what he was doing, knew what he was talking about. The 6 of us made a pact that it was a bear, and to never talk about it again. But then, things didn't stop there. As we were going back to our house, we heard the howl again, and this time it was full of rage. It sounded closer as well. Our fathers told us to run. The 3 of them were side by side, firing at something. Of course, we didn't go far. Whatever it was died that afternoon. My dad told me to get a few shovels and be quick about it. We didn't want anyone to see anything. I was the only one they let approach it because I had already seen it through the window. We took turns digging the hole. It was a Bigfoot. I know it was. 9 feet or taller, and so wide that I could not jump over it. It was a male. His face was all shot up, but his upper lip was 5 inches from the base of his nose to the opening. Its arms were as big as my dad's legs. His fingers were as wide as Coke cans. Its feet were longer than the barrel of my shotgun. We buried it and left for my house. Our mothers were waiting for us and frantically asked what it was. We said it was a bear and that it was injured, so we had to put it down and bury it. We didn't want to get in trouble with the game warden. That's what we told them, and I think my mother knew the truth, but it was best just not said. So if any of those 4 encounters stuck out to you, let me know which one it was down in the comments. Do you have an encounter of your own? I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you'd like to. Also down there are ways to donate to the channel. There's a Patreon and a PayPal, and here on YouTube are memberships and super thanks. And of course, if you're looking for a free way to support the channel, you can hit the like button, you can subscribe, comment, share, tell all your friends, and all that other stuff. And I will see you in the next video. And of course, if you live in Canada or just want to celebrate with us, it's Canada Day on July 1st, so happy Canada Day. And I think that I'll be having a video coming out on July 4th, unless I have my day screwed up. So yeah, we're getting all the holidays in 1 week, aren't we? So anyways, with that, I hope you'll join me for Friday's video. It's a podcast, kind of more casual than this is, and I hope to see you there. As I said, thank you for pulling up a stump, thank you for watching, and I'll see you then. Have a good week.